This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern. And every week we bring you conversations with authors about their books and research and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon. Click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we cannot thank you enough. Now, first of all, I'd like to welcome Yael Mizrahi-Arnaud, today's episode's guest co-host with the most. Yael is a long-time friend of the podcast and has been active in grassroots and policy work on Israel and Palestine, notably at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. She is currently a fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute North America and pursuing a PhD in history at New York University. Hello, Yael. Welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hi, Gilad. This episode is part of a series in partnership with the Israel office of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation that we like to call Israel Behind the Headlines, delving deep into and unpacking issues underlying our lives here in Israel. Our guest today is a veteran social, political, and environmental activist, both in his native city of Ashkelon and its surrounding area, and at the national level as a Knesset candidate for Meretz. Currently, he's the director of an NGO called Rabbis for Human Rights, and his semi-autobiographical book, The Periphery Rebellion, the guide for a much-needed revolution in Israeli society, has just been published in Hebrew by Pardes Publishers.
Avi Dabush, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello.
It's great
Nice to see you.
It's great to have you here. So an underlying theme in your book is the disconnect between the center and the periphery, between the upper middle class, predominantly Ashkenazi residents of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and their environs, and the working and lower middle class, predominantly Mizrahi residents of the north and south of the country. Now, before we delve into policy issues, which feature a great deal of your book, I think that there lies a cognitive issue as well, some sort of lack of mutual understanding between these two groups. Now, as someone who's operated in these two camps, both as a local activist in the northwestern Negev and national politician for Meretz, what do you think is the thing that the center and the periphery misunderstand about each other?
Well, it's a very good question. Of course, and a very big one. I must say that the book is about the power relations between the center and the periphery in Israel. It's not only an Israeli issue, of course, but in Israel, maybe for me, it's very radical question because we are such a small country. And of course, if we are talking about Jews, and we must talk about Arabs in the peripheries because it's not only Mizrahi-oriented, as you mentioned. Now we're talking about former Ethiopian and Russian-speaking and, of course, Arabs. But we can think that, the mutual ethos of the Jews in Israel can unite us all in a way. This is the vision of Zionism and so on. And we see that in all the perimeters of the OECD and of course the Western democratic nations, we can see that it's a very deep and radical gaps between the peripheries and the center. And if we are talking about the cognitive issue or the way that it was developed, we have a very rooted stereotypes of the peripheries. I always talk about the peripheries as a kind of mythological land. We have a lot of myths about the peripheries, and in a way we can see always, even in the family levels or the community and so on, when there is weakness, you can, in a way, throw your stories on the weakened part. So in a way, the peripheries in Sderot,
sort of project your misconceptions on the...
and when you are in the weekend part, sometimes you can't, or it's a very hard thing to do to create your own myth or your own narrative. So I can say about Sderot, I live in Sderot now, which is kind of a symbol of the war against Gaza, against the Hamas, and so on. Each elections, and we have a lot of elections in Israel, there is this way of the media to tell the story. With the same people in the same place, looking for the people that will say, I love Bibi, of course, and I hate the people in Gaza, we must use force and so on. And of course, there are people like that, but they are the minority in Sderot, and the story is much varied and much fascinating. But we always get this story again and again and again, and actually people in the center of Israel really believe in that story, and it's amazing for me because the reality is so different than that. And of course, when I just talked with my friend Professor Meir Buzaglo about the gaps, if we are talking about educational gaps, and I told him that in Ramat HaSharon the educate young people, that finish their high school, they get 50 times more high grades in their, graduation. How do you call that?
Matriculation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then Sderot, Rahat, and Ofakim. And he didn't believe me. He said, you are talking about 50%. No, 50 times more. So we can't always know how deep this, because of course the geographical thing, but even in our head, it's the same population, it's the same. It can be so radical, but it is, unfortunately.
And what about the other way around? Like, what do the people in the periphery misconceive about people in the center?
You talked about the Ashkenazi and the Mizrahi. The narrative is very rooted in those places. I am talking in my book about this. It's a very strong story in our neighborhood, in Sderot and the area, the kibbutzim, of course, about the apples that in the 50s they are throwing away in Sderot area, and they ruin those apples, and the mothers and the young people that are in Sderot, they are
just
running.
To put it in context, as you mentioned in the book, it's crops that came from the kibbutzim, and they surpassed the quota that they were allowed to grow. That's why they had to throw them away. So they brought them. It was in the 50s when, at the time when the Israeli economy was very centralized. So they couldn't really. There was very little flexibility. So what they had to do, they had orders from the government to throw away apples that exceeded the quotas, and they did it in Sderot.
In Sderot.
They brought them in trucks from the kibbutzim into Sderot, and
then of course they are trying, the mothers and other people that are looking to those apples, again, people that have no food security and so on. They try to get those apples before they ruin them. So it's a very brutal picture in a way. In a way, it's a tragedy from both sides. And I mentioned that I heard the first time that I heard this story is from Nir Meir, which is the head of the kibbutzim movement. So this is really interesting. And people in Sderot and other places still have this vision. And still they ask me, why Meretz? How can you go with Meretz, with the people? Part of them, Mapam, was part of Mapai, but not all of them. But it's not really interesting.
historically it was affiliated with the kibbutz movement.
Yeah, part of the hegemonian parties in those the 50s and the 60s and so on. They are the people that really in a lot of ways, and this is true, historically they put us aside. They didn't saw us. Of course, they threw us in a way to those areas, to Sderot and Ofakim and Netivot and other places, and this is still part of the game, still part of the political identity, and this is part of what I'm trying to say again to the people in the peripheries. We must vote to our interest, and right now the left side and the left side and the right side doesn't in the political arena in Israel. They don't see our interests and so on. So we must have our interest very sharpened, and I believe that part of being left in Israel is being connected to those interests. And unfortunately, it doesn't come to reality, but this is part of my project.
So as you're mentioning, history is crucial to understanding how we got to where we are today. And in your book, a good portion is dedicated to history, specifically the questions of how the Yishuv treated the Yemeni workers when they arrived in 1911, to how the State of Israel allowed Mizrahim to languish in the 10 cities or Ma'abarot. And I guess also the distinctions and difficulties that developed between the development towns and their competition with the kibbutzim, as you mentioned in the story, and also the social struggles that were launched against the status quo, specifically the Wadi Salib riots and the Black Panthers. So the question is, are Israelis familiar with this history? And if not, what can be done to change that? This is also just part of a larger question of, who's your target audience? Who would you like to read the book?
Wow, it's really interesting. I just came from Jerusalem. I talked with bat mitzvah, young daughter of my friend, and she asked me about she have this bat mitzvah project and about justice, and she asked me about it, and she didn't know all of this history, and it's no surprise, of course. And a lot of people ask me, is there a rebellion, about Meretz Periphery? Is there a rebels or rebellion in the peripheries? And I'm telling them that there is always a rebellion. It's from the 50s, and then, of course, Wadi Salib and the Black Panthers and the tents and other things. And it's a kind of hidden history of Israel. And, of course, we understand why, because the government in a lot of ways, and I understand that, of course, doesn't want us to know these stories. And this is part of identity that is growing up in the peripheries. I know for sure that people in the peripheries or young people in the peripheries know much more. Not from the books and not from their schools, but they have their identity and their history. We see it also with our Palestinians, Israeli Palestinians, that have this history, although the books that the Israeli government doesn't allow them to know this history. And for me, it's a book that I want every young person in the peripheries to read. I want it for myself. When I was a young person in Ashkelon, and part of the religious Zionism, Bnei Akiva, and so on in Israel, nobody told me about those things, and it was a very late bloom in this manner, only 20 years ago or something like that, because you must go out of your place and then you can look at it, this is my story, and then understand the gaps, then understand the power relations. So I hope, this is my fantasy, that a lot of young people in the peripheries of Israel will read this book. But of course, I want also people from the center. I really believe that this is an open conversation. In that manner, I'm not a Marxist that people from the center can't understand because their reality they can't understand. In a way, it's true. They can't understand fully, and nobody, I as a man can't understand fully how is it to be a woman in Israel or in other places in the world. But they can't understand something, and they can't be a part of this this struggle. As I can be a feminist and part of the women's struggle in Israel in all the areas. So I must say that it's also kind of trying to have this dialogue between us and the people in the center, trying to say you have a place not as the leaders of this struggle, but you have a place in this struggle. And I hope that this connection will get something. Right now we are in the midst of trying to making again of the Peripheries March or the Equality March as we did in 2016, as I mentioned in the book. And we have all the youth movements, which basically they are from the center and get their power from the center. A part of it, and even the kibbutzim are part of it. And also the Council of the Unrecognized Villages in the Negev of the Bedouins and other Tikkun movement and others. And I really believe that we must work with the people with the power or with the kind of imaginary power in order to change things and not only be with the people in the peripheries and not gaining any force.
Can you tell us more a bit more about your personal trajectory? I mean, it came up here and there throughout the last 15 minutes or so. What made you switch sides, as it were? Growing up as part of the community that you were in, that, as we said, is traditional, predominantly right-wing, had a lot of resentment towards the Zionist left and Meretz in particular. What was there a moment? Was there like a process that led you to realize that, to shed this resentment that I'm sure you felt as well and maybe still do, and also, asking you, more pragmatically as a politician, I mean, it is really an uphill struggle to try and give Meretz a foothold among these communities.
Yeah. It's a process, but also, of course, there were moments. I was born in 1976, and I must say that I really feel, maybe it's a story that I tell to myself, but in my family, those values of the left, as I see it, of social justice, of being part of supporter of peace in general, and even specifically when we are talking about the peace agreement between Egypt and Israel and so on, there were parts of my family values. So in 1993, I had this gap year between my high school and the army service, and I went for a few months to Jerusalem to study Judaism, in part of my personal questions about my place in Judaism. And then there was a very big struggle against the Oslo Accord, and I was part of it because I was part of Bnei Akiva and so on. And more and more, and I felt it in my stomach that I don't want to be part of it. It was very violent. I'm talking about 2 years before Rabin assassination. So it wasn't a physical violence, but it was a violence of people that are thinking that they are really have all the knowledge in the world, and they are completely just, and the other people don't know nothing. They don't know how to be Jewish and Zionist and so on. So it was very violent. And also it didn't have any alternative, because I asked my friends, okay, I understand the Oslo Accord is bad or it have many flaws, but what do we suggest to the Israeli society? There is Palestinian people, there are Palestinian people, there is a struggle, there is a conflict. What can we do? And mostly the answer was, of course, there isn't any Palestinian people, and it's all narrative and so on, and it's our place and so on. So for me, in a way, and I'm saying again, I know that it's a story that I'm telling to myself, but I really believe that it's a story that connects to a lot of people. This is part of my heritage. Of course, I grew up in a conservative family or community, a very traditional community, but I really believe that there were, and still is, a lot of people that really fully understand that this is our interest. This is our interest in terms of social justice or the responsibility of the government to its citizens. And this is part of our interest when we are talking about peace process and when we are talking about the children of Gaza. And I'm talking about my children in Sderot and also the children of Gaza. It's our interest to have them live in a better life in order to our children to live a better life. And I really believe that if we can articulate that in another way and be part. It's not that we are talking from the center to the people and this is the reality on this or this is the truth of the world or so on. But we are part of this community, and I'm saying a lot of people. I was in channel 14. And they ask me why.
Which is the Israeli Fox News. Mm-hmm.
Or even worse. And they are saying, you are trying to, as a left wing, to tell the peripheries what is right and so on. And I'm saying, no, I'm not telling the peripheries. I am living in the peripheries, so I'm not representative of the peripheries. I don't believe in this representative stuff. But I am from the peripheries, and I understand my interest and the interest of my neighborhood and my neighborhood in terms of Rahat and Ofakim and Netivot and so on. So it's not telling them, but it's being with them. And from this place, I really believe that it's not only a question of left and right. It's a question of what good for this country. As you mentioned, this is the underline of this book is the way that I think that the Israeli society must be. It's not only for my children in Sderot. It's also for the children of Tel Aviv and other places, because I really believe that we miss so many things. And the last thing that I want to say about it, it's that we don't know the reality as we start this conversation, that almost 50% in Sderot, in Tiberias, in other places, and of course in the Arab society, they don't vote. So it's not that they are right-wing supporters. No, they are not voting. They are disconnected to the system. They are really disappointed, or even worse, really in despair of. And we must do something about it as left, of course. But I believe that it's a matter of the government, not only the left-wing parties.
So. You make a reference to the idea of what has been called a first Israel versus a second Israel, which is maybe a way of defining the have versus the have-nots. And I'm wondering what you think about this classification. Is it useful? Is it more divisive by reinforcing the disparities? And what might be a better way of bringing the residents of the towns and cities of the periphery and their struggles into the public discourse?
I really believe that we must see the reality as it is. And of course, there are gaps. And in a way, you can talk about first Israeli, second, and so on. And you can talk about the third and fourth. In the Negev, we have Omer and Leavim and very established communities. And we have the unrecognized villages with no electricity and water and so on. So this is the reality. But the question is how we can fix this reality, and even if we want to fix this reality, because if you mention this theory of, in a way, my friend, I really have a connection with him because of his background and his doctorate about Ovadia Yosef, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef and so on, which is brilliant. But the political idea of first and second Israel in terms of getting it to support Netanyahu, which is, of course, first Israel in all manners, and we are talking about class. And we're talking also about Ashkenazi and Mizrahi, of course, is very Ashkenazi and very non-traditional, non-religious in any way. I think it's a pity, and of course for me it's part of seeing the peripheries as it used to be, like 30 years ago when Avishai Ben Chaim and others lived there, and they left the peripheries. And I believe that this is part of what is happening in the political sphere, in the left, of course, but also in the right. Those stories about from Kachlon about Givat Olga and Avi Dabush about his years in Jerusalem, and now, of course, he's a millionaire in Tel Aviv. And in a way, it's disconnecting from the reality. And in a way, it's not in their or his interest to fix this reality, because I can ask him, okay, if this is the reality, how can it be after 12 years in a row that Netanyahu is in charge? How can it be that there is first Israel and second Israel? And I want to fix that. And if Netanyahu was the man to fix that, hallelujah. I will say I would support him, but we know that he's not. He has so many chances to do it, but he doesn't care about the periphery.
On this, I want to ask your opinion exactly, because Likud, or the periphery is a Likud stronghold by and large. Mm-hmm. I mean, many people support Likud consecutively, despite their poor track record. And I'm wondering why you think this track record is so poor. Not only because politically it makes sense to appeal to these people, but also many Likud politicians are from the periphery. I don't know, Avi Dichter lives in Ashkelon, right? Miri Regev is originally from Kiryat Gat, just nearby. I mean, these are people who, just like you, came from these communities, and I'm sure care about them no less than you do. So why do you think Likud has overlooked and disregarded the periphery for so long?
It's a very good question. Just mentioning the bat mitzvah girl that I talked to, her portion of the week, Parashat HaShavua, is about, it's with the sentence, very famous one, Tzedek Tzedek Tirdof. You should pursue justice. And she asked me, what do you understand from that? And I understand that you have to be very active. And in my book, I'm starting with another Jewish quote about the people that are in the light and the people that are in the dark. And the one which is in the light, he can't see what's in the dark. And the one in the dark can see the one in the light. And it's very, very hard to see the people in the dark, the people or the reality in the dark. And of course, it's a universal thing. And the people you mentioned, I know them personally. They can't see, and they don't have. They are not making the efforts to see, because you have to make efforts to see. And otherwise, you can tell yourself, those people are not trying enough, and it's part of their culture and so on. A lot of stereotypes that, of course, we have about poor people in large, and specifically in Israel, the people in the peripheries. But then you have to ask a very harsh question. Is there a genetic gap between, the children in Sderot and Ofakim and Rat and the children in Ramat HaSharon? I believe that, of course not. So you have to understand how can you have not equality in terms of money or so on, but equality in the terms of possibilities, and you don't have that. So the people you mentioned, and the Likud in large, and the political sphere in Israel, the political system.
You can say the same thing about Shas and other parties.
In a way, I can't, because in Shas there are people that really feel that. Igal Guetta, which is no longer in Shas, and others was in Rabbis for Human Rights, we are our social justice work is directed to the people who lives in poverty, and Shas people, they are part of our allies in the Knesset. The people in the Likud, most of them not. Part of them, yes. People in Meretz, unfortunately not. Ilan Gilon was really our ally.
Who recently passed away.
Yeah. So we don't have a lot of... There isn't a big lobby for the poor people in Israel. Part of it's a very big interest of, companies and so on. Part of it is the people that are not connected to these issues. So I just mentioned that a lot of people, of course, vote in Sderot and other places to the Likud, but a lot of people are disconnected from the system. And those people are not in interest to anyone in the political system. I think it's the hope of the left parties and the left politics in Israel, but they can't see it right now.
So, on that note, the grassroots plays a big role, and you have been working in that field, but also the political solution. Mm-hmm. What sort of political developments need to occur for the periphery to prosper? Or what sort of policy recommendations would you have implemented? Mm-hmm.
It's a question of course, short-term and long-term. In short-term, you can see very specific things that we can do. For example, when we are talking about health issues, we are in average, we live something like 4 or 5 years less in the Negev and in the north than the people in the center. So very simple thing is a thing that the government decided 18 years ago and doesn't implement is the second hospital in the Negev and another hospital in the north. And of course there are a lot of other things, but it's a very quick and measurable thing that they can do, and it's a matter of of money, of decisions, of being very persistent about it. And again, we can say about the health, the educational issues, again, the equality march that we did in 2016, what was about differential budgeting for the peripheries, children and so on. And in another issues, we have very clear vision, and in a way, it's very frustrating because it's the vision of the Israeli government, and it's a government decision and so on. But you have to be, of course, in our critical in those years of a crisis in the political arena. It's even more radical. But you have just to implement that. But this this is in the short term. In the long term, we talked about the thing that in the bottom of these issues, the stereotypes, the way that the culture, in a way, and we can see it in the media and in the political arena, in other places, in other spheres. How can we make and of course it's also a responsibility of us in the peripheries. How can we make the culture flourish in the periphery? How can we take our advantages, because we have a lot of advantages, and work with it, not in order to be kind of the same as Tel Aviv. No, I love Tel Aviv, and it's great to have Tel Aviv, but we have to make Be'er Sheva as a very strong place that people will say, I want to be in Be'er Sheva, because it has things that we can't find in Tel Aviv. And again, if we are talking about the north of Israel, in Carmiel or Jerusalem and so on. So this is a very deep work that we must do.
Also, in your book, you relate to the Palestinian question. So in your advocacy and your work, how do you see this playing a part in the distinctions between the center and the periphery? What role does a potential agreement with Palestinians play in dealing with the differences and the discord between the center and the periphery, if it plays any role at all? And maybe you can talk about also your work with A Land for All, Eretz Lekulam, a confederation approach, and how that may address some of these questions.
I know for a fact that it has a very deep meaning for the peripheries if we will end the conflict. We can see that the people that suffer the most, of course, in Israel and in Palestine, in Gaza and the West Bank and so on, are the people from the periphery, are the people that live in poverty and the weakened communities and so on. And the opposite, I believe that if we can, and of course it's very complicated, but if we can end this conflict, it would be potential, not it's a thing that we have to work on, but it will be a potential for flourishing of these communities. I can see it, of course, in the Western Negev, in Sderot and Ofakim and Netivot and other places near Gaza. We used to have a very important relations with Gaza. Of course, it's a very complicated history. We talked about Ashkelon, so a lot of Palestinians from Ashkelon are evacuated in 48 and even after the war in 50 and 51 from Majdal, and a lot of people from the Negev, and a lot of Israelis, of course, my children and others, doesn't even know that a lot of Bedouins have family in Gaza. And right now we are in a better place. It's really important to say that I don't have a lot of good thing to say about this government, but in the last year more and more people from Gaza are coming to our fields and area and work. Right now we are talking about 20,000 people, that it's a new thing. And it used to be like that, till the first Intifada, of course, in very large numbers. So it's not a solution, and there was an occupation and power relations and so on, but we used to live together in a way. And I really believe that we can do it again in other manners. And of course, you can't take yourself to the past again. But it used to be a good thing. And people, it's really interesting that when there is a war between Sderot and Gaza, there are people in Gaza that still have this phone to their friends in Sderot, and the other way around. So there is a kind of an infrastructure to make this happen, and the peripheries have a big role in that. because in Sderot, the Chaim Uliel fathers, which it's a family of musicians, very famous musicians in Sderot. He used to have a cafe that all the people from Gaza came to this cafe because it was an Arab cafe in a lot of ways, and there was an Arab music and so on. So again, it's not a thing that we can reestablish as it was. But I really believe that we have this connection. And
there's a potential.
This potential. And when we are talking about land for all, it's again a potential of living together. Of course, it's part of the history and the culture of the Mizrahi people, the Mizrahi-oriented Jews, the Arab Jews. And it's not only the culture. I believe that it's a very big thing of identity. And if we will have this identity, I really believe that the opposite of the vision of Ehud Barak, to be disconnected from the Middle East, we can be part of the Middle East. And I really, and of course it's a kind of a very big vision, but I believe in that my children, maybe my grandchildren will visit Damascus and will visit Tripoli, the region of their families. And we will be part of the Middle East. I really believe that this is our interest. If we want to establish a sustainable country or sustainable community in Israel. I'm a Zionist, and I really believe that we have a place in the Middle East. But in order to have this place for many, many years, we must be part of this Middle East, and we must understand it's very hard, and we have enemies. Of course, I'm not, I'm not blind about it. But if our enemies, allies, neighborhood countries will be stronger and will be part of a dialogue with us, and things happening. Of course, even the Abraham Accord and the agreements, I really believe that the left should be more, open our arms to that, because this is part of it. We can experience or vision together part of another Middle East, and I believe that we are part of it in the peripheries.
Inshallah.
Well, what a note to end on. Avi Dabush, the author of the Periphery Rebellion, the guide for a much-needed revolution in Israeli society, social, political, and environmental activist. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And also thanks to Itai Shelem, the manager of TLV1 Studios, and to you, my co-host, Yael Mizrahi-Arnaud. Thank you very much. And again, to the Israel office of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for the partnership and support for this series. And now we have a request, because many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and we would like to ask you to please consider writing us a review. Good, bad, or ugly, up to you. You too can support us by going to our website and subscribing onto a Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has something like 750 interviews, all free and accessible for download. Like us on Facebook, follow me and Yael on Twitter, and join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from me here in Tel Aviv, goodbye.